Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on physical exercise and cognitive health. Thank you all so much for joining. As some of you may know, this is actually the third webinar in our BrainHQ Academy series. You might have caught one of our earlier ones. One was on music in the brain and one was on memory. And we'll certainly have more in the future on interesting topics, so keep your eye out for those too. My name is Margie, and I'm here just to take care of a little housekeeping before we get into the heart of the webinar. First, the agenda. After this introduction period, we'll have an activity, just a short little activity that you can join in if you choose. Followed that, Dr. Mahncke, who's the CEO here at Posit Science and a neuroscientist by training, will talk about how physical exercise impacts cognitive function and why, among other things. Then he'll be joined by Dr. Michelle Voss, who is a preeminent expert on the relationship between physical exercise and cognitive health. She's from the University of Iowa, and we're very thrilled to have her here with us today. After that, Henry and Michelle will answer some of your questions. We probably won't get to all of them, but as many as we possibly can. How do we do all these things? So some of the things you should know is that there will be a few polls throughout this webinar where we just kind of ask for your input on things. If a poll pops up on your screen, just choose the answer that you like the best and submit it for us. If you don't see your option, just go to the chat feature and type it in there. To see these features, you just roll your cursor over your Zoom screen and you'll see them pop up at the bottom of the screen. If you ever have a question, please put it in the Q&A feature. Again, you'll find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Just type your question right in there and we'll get to as many as we can. Some of them will be answered by my colleague Stephanie in writing, and some will be answered live by Dr. Michelle, Dr. Voss, and Dr. Mahncke. The last thing is that this webinar is recorded. We will share the link to the recording in a follow-up email in about a week or so. So if you want to watch it again or share it with someone else, you can do that. I think that's about it. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mahncke. Oh, actually, I'm wrong. We're going to start first with a little bit of an exercise that will be led by Dr. Mahncke and by my colleague, Stephanie.
Hi there, everybody. So today we thought that we would jumpstart this webinar on exercise in the brain with a little bit of yoga at our desk in order to, get us all nice and ready, all nice and refreshed after that lunch break, maybe towards the end of the day if you're on the East Coast. Henry has been generous enough to offer to be our demo over here. So we would encourage you to go ahead and come to the edge of your seat and join us for a little bit of yoga for the next 2 minutes. All right, so everybody start by coming to the edge of your seat. Plant both feet on the floor in front of you. Put your hands on your lap. Set up nice and tall. Relax. Start by taking a deep breath in and then a long exhale out. All right, now we're going to start nodding our head up and down, nice and slow. And then you can also start shaking your head left to right. Feel that stretch in the back of your neck. Do what feels good. All right, now return to center. Bring your nose up and start going around in a circle. Go around one direction. And then go ahead and reverse directions. If you were going clockwise, go counterclockwise and vice versa. All right, now let's go ahead and drop our hands to our sides and do some shoulder rolls. So scrunch up those shoulders, bring them up close to your ears, start rolling them back, try and get your shoulder blades as close together as they can. Do that a couple times. All right, and now we're gonna do a little bit of a side stretch. So you can either grab your chair or the desk in front of you, bring your other arm up over your head and do a little stretch off to the side. If you were a pro and you want a deeper stretch, you can also cross that arm on your lap instead. All right. Go ahead, exhale, return to center, and then we're going to do one more on the other side. All right, feel that stretch. Keep your heart lifted. All right, one last exhale. Return to center. release, and we are done. So that was hopefully a nice little activity to get you all started with the webinar today. Those clips were selected from Yoga at Your Desk by Yoga with Adrian, if you are interested. But now moving on, what we're actually going to do is we are going to jump into our first poll. So let me go ahead and get that launched here. So you should see a poll pop up now. Choose the answer that best applies to you. If you, so the question is, what is your favorite exercise, or why do you exercise? Excuse me. There are many different reasons why you might exercise. I see a bunch of people are already jumping on it, which is fantastic. If there's an option here that doesn't quite fit why you exercise, go ahead and type it in the chat. I'm going to turn chat back on for everybody. There we go.
These responses are flying in, Stephanie.
Yeah, they are.
And I see no one is endorsing the question I suggested, so that's a lesson for me.
So Henry, why do you exercise primarily?
I exercise because it gives me more energy. I was actually just talking to my mom last weekend, and we agreed that the days that we didn't exercise were the ones we were most tired. And weirdly, the days we did exercise were the days we felt most energetic and peppy.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens.
There's a lesson in there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to let this go for another couple seconds here. We have most people, there we go. It looks like everybody has gone ahead and submitted. So let's go ahead and end the poll and take a look at the results here. So a lot of people want to feel great, and after that, they also want to, prolong their life. They want to live longer.
Feel great and live longer, a little bit of de-stress. And there is no one here who wants to be part of a team, as far as I can tell. So what does that tell us, Stephanie?
Everybody's on their own exercise journey.
That's exactly right.
All right. Well, most people think of all of these reasons as, great reasons to exercise, and they are.
They are all great.
But Henry is here now to jump into a presentation about one more reason why we should exercise and how it's good for our brains as well.
All right. Well, I am going to grab the screen share here, Stephanie. Give me just a chance here and do that. And with any luck, you see my slides now. Does that look good? All right. Well, fantastic. Well, hey, that was great, folks. And Stephanie, thanks for getting us started with some exercise as we get ready to talk about the role of physical exercise in brain health. I feel my blood pumping a little bit more than it was before. And I know doing those exercises burned up a few of the calories left over in my bloodstream from lunch today. And it gave my muscles a little workout, even though I was just here in the chair. So that was good for my body and my physical health. But what about my brain and my brain health? Can physical exercise affect cognitive function? And can it make the brain healthier and more resilient as well? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in today's Brain Health Academy webinar. So let's dive in. Well, let's dive in by pressing the correct button. There we go. Exercise can mean a lot of things, and there are so many ways to exercise. Often we think of exercise as being outdoors, like this person going for a jog, but it can also mean physically demanding activities at a gym, like this person lifting weights, or these people who are building their strength and their flexibility and their endurance by doing yoga, or this person who's training her sense of balance and her core strength on a balance ball. That looks very challenging to me, to be honest, but people do it. Or even these folks who are out getting some exercise in nature and doing some gardening, or even an example like this, taking the dog out for a brisk walk. These are all great forms of exercise. And a question that, we might ask to start this is, we all know that physical exercise improves the body's health, but how does it do that? And I want to say a few words about improving the body health before we talk about the brain. Now, I know that we're here to talk about brain health, but understanding what exercise does to the body is going to set us up to understand what exercise does for the brain. Now, it turns out that exercise does quite a few good things to the body, and we're going to focus on 3 of them right now. First of all, engaging in physical exercise gives you a healthier heart. When you exercise, your heart rate goes up. As your muscles work, they consume energy, and your heart pumps harder and faster to send more oxygen and more energy sources like sugar through the blood to feed that demand. And as a result of your heart rate going up, your heart gets in better shape. And what that does is it lets it beat more strongly and more regularly. That not only gives you the energy you need while you're exercising, but it also protects you against long-term risks like heart attacks. The second thing that happens is that engaging in physical exercise improves your metabolism. And what I mean by that is how your body consumes energy. Now, I just had lunch before this webinar because I'm in San Francisco just after lunch. And when I ate lunch, my digestive system processed my lunch and broke it down into various nutrients. The bread that I had in my sandwich got converted into sugar, which then floats around in my body looking for something to do. Now, since I exercised this morning, my body was ready to consume that energy and it absorbed that sugar quickly out of my blood. And that's what we want, a metabolic system that processes energy quickly and efficiently. Without that, we can get significant health problems where the body becomes insensitive to sugar in the blood and just lets it float around. And this can cause things like diabetes, which are a big problem for us. Finally, engaging in physical exercise releases growth factors that cause our muscle cells to grow stronger. Literally, they build more molecular motors inside of themselves that power our strength. And those same growth factors help muscle cells work together. So they're all pulling at this exactly at the same time, which makes us stronger. So that's how physical exercise improves the body's health. But what about the brain? Well, one really important thing to know about the brain is that it's part of the body. It's right there inside your skull with oxygen and nutrients that are brought to it by the heart and the blood. The brain consumes energy while it does its work, just like any other system in the body. And sometimes people can forget that, right? It can be easy to think about the brain as the mind, as part of psychology, as part of the soul and the spirit. And those are all great ways to think about the mind. But for today, we really need to think about the brain as a biological system, as part of the body. So if physical exercise can improve the body's health, can it also improve the brain's health because the brain is part of the body? Well, we can figure this out using the tools of science. If we want to know that an activity, any activity, a brain training program, a diet or an exercise program, if we want to know how it affects the brain, then we should do a randomized controlled trial. That means taking a group of people and randomly assigning half of them to do an activity, for example, an exercise program, and half of them to do something else, a control group, and measuring their cognitive function before and afterwards. That's the gold standard way for us to tell if an activity specifically improves cognitive function. So scientists have done quite a few randomized controlled trials of physical exercise and brain health. And here's a nice example. I'm going to talk about a study that was led by researchers in Germany. They enrolled people over the age of 70 who were cognitively healthy, but didn't engage in much physical activity. And then they randomized them into two groups. Half of these people did a very comprehensive exercise program involving aerobic exercise, endurance training, strength training, flexibility training, even balance and coordination training, a lot. The other half did no specific exercise training, and they served as a control group. And the exercise group actually trained twice per week in 90-minute sections, so a lot of exercise. And the researchers saw something pretty great. They measured everyone's memory using a standardized story memory task. They read a story out loud, and then they counted how many details of that story could a person remember. And on the left, in blue, are the results from the control group. And you can see their memory doesn't change much from before to the end of the study. But in the right in green are the results from the exercise group. And you can see that their memory improved by about 25%. They could remember about 6.5 items before the exercise. And after that 6 months of exercise, they could remember more than 8 items. That's a big improvement. So this result shows us that this exercise program at this intensity can improve memory function, which is fantastic. Now, it turns out that researchers have run a lot of trials like this, using a lot of different types of physical exercise at different intensities. And that lets us learn something. By looking at a lot of studies, we can identify patterns for what seems to work best. And in fact, a wonderful group of researchers from the University of Canberra at Australia analyzed 36 independent trials of physical exercise, and they carefully evaluated the differences between them, compared them and contrasted them to identify the patterns that drove the most benefit. So let's take a look at what we find when we look at all of these studies of exercise. Well, the first question we might ask is, hey, what kind of exercise is best for cognitive performance gains? Well, I have good news. Aerobic exercise, which includes a lot of things like walking and jogging and running and swimming, anything that kicks up your heart rate like that scores very well on these measures. And also, so does strength training. And sometimes when people hear about strength training, they get a little nervous, right? I don't want to go to the gym and lift huge barbells. But the kind of strength training done in these studies can be relatively low weights, can use resistance bands. This kind of activity also scores very well. However, the research tells us that you really do have to raise your heart rate and break a little bit of a sweat. Just pure stretching without anything more than that doesn't seem to improve cognitive performance. And in fact, stretching is often used as a control activity in these studies because it's thought to not do much for the brain. Now, a lot of people are interested in yoga and Pilates and Tai Chi and things of this nature. And I've actually seen a number of studies where these kinds of activities also look pretty good for brain function. There aren't quite enough of these studies that have been done yet to include them in a big group analysis, like I mentioned. But my own read of the scientific literature suggests that just about any of these physical activities that raises your heart rate meaningfully is going to be good for brain function. You don't have to be picky, and there's no magic single right answer. So pick something that you enjoy. We might ask next, well, how intensely do we have to exercise? Well, scientists divide exercise into 3 levels of intensity. And informally, you can identify them, but by how much spare lung capacity you have while exercising. Low intensity exercises are like a very gentle stroll. And that means you have plenty of lung capacity. You can sing while you stroll, is how we put it. And we've all seen musicals after all. Moderate intensity exercise is more like a good brisk walk. You can talk while you're walking, but you notice with your breath that you're exerting yourself and you probably can't break out into song. High intensity exercise means you need most of your breath just for keeping up with your workout. Now, it turns out that low intensity exercise isn't very effective for improving cognitive function. It can definitely help with physical health, so that's good enough unto itself. But you probably need to work a little bit harder to get a brain health benefit. But the good news is that moderate intensity exercise and high intensity workouts are both equally effective. You don't need to wear yourself out every time you exercise for it to be good for brain health. Now, a third question these researchers asked by looking at these groups of studies was, well, how long should we exercise to have an effect on brain function? Well, what the analysis of these published studies suggested was that if the exercise lasted under 45 minutes, the results were not as solid. Now, I want to be careful when I say that because there have definitely been studies that have shown benefits with under 45 minutes of exercise in a session, but there are also studies that don't show benefit, so it's a bit more questionable. On the other hand, for studies where people did 40, 45 or more minutes of exercise in a session, they generally showed very strong, reliable results across lots of studies. So make sure that you have the time to keep going when you start an exercise session to get the best results for your brain. Finally, these researchers asked, well, how often should we exercise for cognitive performance? And again, scientists divided up the options into 3 groups. You might think of low frequency, maybe just exercising 1 or 2 days per week, medium frequency, exercising 3 or 4 days per week, and high frequency, where people are making time to exercise 5, 6, or even 7 days a week. And that's very impressive, I have to say. Now, the good news here is that all of these frequencies showed great results. People exercising 1 or 2 days a week showed good results, as did people who exercised 3 or 4 days a week. People who exercised 5 or more days a week showed what I would call exceptional results. And, frankly, good for them. They deserve it with all of that work. But again, the good news is that just 1 or 2 days of exercise per week was shown to drive good cognitive gains. So to sum up, what have we learned? First of all, some exercise is better than none. And then, if you can, doing more is better than some. If you don't exercise, well, start easy and then work your way up. Pick any kind of exercise you like, as long as it's elevating your heart rate, but you don't have to wear yourself out every session. And then aim for at least 1 to 2 times per week and shoot for 40 or 45 minutes. Now, a very natural question to ask next is, hey, since physical exercise improves cognitive function, does it also protect against the onset of Alzheimer's disease? Well, you'll be happy to know that researchers have had the same question, and the answer is a resounding, it seems likely, but we're not quite sure. So why don't we have a more definitive answer? This is a very important question. Well, here's how we'd figure it out. We'd have to do a randomized controlled trial. A researcher would randomly divide people into 2 groups, an exercise group and a control group. They then wait for 5 to 10 years, and at the end, see who has a healthy brain and who has Alzheimer's disease. Now, this is really hard, and it hasn't been done yet. And the reason it's hard is because it's difficult to run such a long study, and because it's difficult to make sure that the people asked to do exercise keep exercising, and it's difficult to make sure that the people you asked not to exercise don't start exercising. So it's a very challenging design, and we hope to see this in the future, but it just hasn't been done yet. So what do researchers do instead? Well, they do the best they can. They do what's called an observational study, where they ask people about their exercise habits and then see if those people go on to have healthy brains or Alzheimer's disease. Now, when the researchers do that, they very reliably see that physical exercise is associated with a measure of protection from Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, exercise is associated with, sometimes around a 14 to 20% reduction in the risk of dementia, which is pretty good. But the concern in these observational studies is this. Maybe the people who exercise also do something else healthy, and that's what really protects you against dementia. Maybe the people who exercise eat healthy, and that's the key. Or maybe the people who exercise live more cognitively stimulating lives, and that's the key. It's hard to be sure with this kind of study, but it's the best answer we're going to have for a while, which is why the answer that physical exercise probably provides a measure of protection against the onset of Alzheimer's disease, and probably a good enough reason to get out there and get some exercise. So we've seen that physical exercise can improve cognitive function, but how does it do that exactly? Well, it turns out that physical exercise improves brain health in very much the same way that it improves the health of the rest of the body, by making the heart more healthy, by making metabolism more efficient, and by releasing growth factors, but this time inside the brain. So let's talk about each of these ways that physical exercise affects brain health. First, let's start with heart health. As we've talked about, exercise strengthens the heart and makes it healthier. A healthier heart does a couple of things. First of all, if you have a healthier heart, it's going to lower high blood pressure. And high blood pressure is bad for the brain. And the reason is because that high blood pressure actually pounds on the brain and brain tissue as blood is flowing through the brain. And that ongoing pressure and pounding can slowly cause the accumulation of little bits of damage to the brain over time. Also, better heart health can lower your risk of stroke and heart attack. And if you have a stroke or a heart attack, that usually causes a lot of potential damage to the brain if they happen. So one important lesson is that anything that's good for the heart is also good for the brain. Second, what about metabolic health? Well, remember, exercise improves the body's ability to absorb blood sugar derived from food, putting that to use instead of allowing it to hang around and damage the body. Now, that turns out to be very important for the brain because the brain consumes almost half of the blood sugar used by the entire body, which means that the brain gets great benefits from efficient use of that energy. On the other hand, a lack of exercise can mean that the body and the brain become insensitive to blood sugar levels. And if that happens, then a person is on the way to developing diabetes. Now, in the brain, diabetes means that the brain can't really take up the blood sugar it needs to operate well. And that can lead to cognitive impairment, cognitive decline, and eventually dementia. So keeping a healthy metabolism and healthy blood sugar levels through regular exercise is really important for brain health. Finally, and very importantly, exercise causes the release of growth factors in the brain. So growth factors are teeny tiny little proteins that act as powerful signals to brain cells and tell them what they should be doing. And in particular, growth factors are absolutely required for brain plasticity. Growth factors permit the brain to rewire itself through learning and experience. So physical exercise quite literally puts the brain in a state where the brain is healthy and ready to change and rewire itself. So growth factors work in two very closely related ways. First of all, they let existing neurons break down and form new connections, which is required to rewire the brain. And second of all, they cause new neurons to be born in the brain, particularly in the hippocampus, which is the seat of learning and memory in the brain. So just like physical exercise builds muscles by releasing growth factors for muscles, physical exercise builds brains by releasing growth factors for brains. And so what does it look like when a brain is getting built stronger through physical exercise? Well, thanks to some beautiful science by our guest today, Dr. Michelle Voss, we can actually see that. In her study, they took 120 healthy older adults and randomized them into two groups. One was the physical exercise group that did aerobic exercise, and the other was a control group who just did stretching. And in the study, they used a brain imaging technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging to look inside the brains of these people before and after the study period. And one place they looked was the hippocampus, which is shown here in yellow. There's one on the left and one on the right. And they saw something just fantastic. On this graph, what they show is that the blue line shows the size of the hippocampus at the beginning of the study, then after 6 months of exercise and 12 months. And you see it's growing quite beautifully. On the red line, this is the size of the hippocampus in the people who are in that control group doing only stretching and toning. And sadly, it's shrinking steadily over time, probably as a result of normal aging. That's a pretty big difference. And I know which group I'd rather be in if I had the choice. And interestingly, most of that growth in the hippocampus occurs exactly in the region where new neurons are born, suggesting that exercise is directly creating brand new neurons in the brain, ready to be integrated into brain networks to help improve brain function. So that's really cool. So we've seen that exercise can have pretty great effects on cognitive function and brain health. And we've learned a bit about the specifics of the types and intensities of exercise that are required to cause good effects. But it turns out that there's more than just the exercise itself. It can matter what you do with your brain while you exercise. So here's really quite a beautiful research study that was done recently. This group of researchers took a group of people and had half of them do ordinary walking in nature, and the other half of them walked in nature with a cognitive awareness plan. That means that people, while they were walking, focused on their senses, the details of what they heard and saw. They imagined what they'd be doing in nature if they had a different job, or what the environment around them would look like if it was used differently for agriculture or grazing or industry. Generally, they used their senses and their imaginations in their brains while they walked. And this research showed that walking in nature with a cognitive awareness plan like that improved attentional sharpness, lowered frustration, and increased feelings of contentment, even more than just walking on its own. Now, I love this story because it shows us something we can all do while we're out for a walk that can make the walk even better for brain health. And here's another really interesting example of how physical activity and cognitive function can interact. This fantastic picture is of an apartment complex in suburban Tokyo. It was designed by two architects who wanted to constantly stimulate the physical body to help people live long and full lives. These apartments are full of weird bumpy floors designed to stimulate your feet and keep you on your toes and train your balance, curved rooms and hallways and bridges to ensure that when you walk, you have to be active and conscious and effortful. All of this designed to drive physical activity and new learning. These architects said that comfort was considered an unconscious slope towards death, and that life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And it's raised the question, should we rethink the physical design of our homes and workspaces to challenge us and drive new learning? And Stephanie, I actually want to pose that as a question to our audience. I think we have a poll about this.
We do indeed. So let me go ahead and get that poll up and running. All right, so you should now be seeing a poll on your screen. Would you like to live in this apartment complex? You know, you could say, I would love to. When can I move in? Or no way, level floors and straight walls for me, thanks. Or maybe you're a little like me and you're like, it'd be neat to visit for a while, but maybe I don't want to live there.
Oh, we're seeing a lot of responses come in. This is quite an interesting place, and I'll say more about it in just a second as we get a few more responses coming in.
What do you think? Do you want to visit there for a week?
That's a pretty, I would actually,
Yeah.
I would like to, and I'd even like to say I'd live there, but probably should check with my wife first. She might have a different opinion.
All right, so we've got 80% of people in with their votes. Come on, everybody.
Looks good.
All right, so there we go. Let's go ahead and end the poll there. And I'll share the results with you. A lot of you were saying the same thing as me and Henry, maybe, which was, be there for a little bit, but maybe not full time. But a lot of you were interested in actually moving into this place.
I think this is a pretty adventurous group we have on the webinar today. Well, the good news is that you can actually also rent this in Airbnb. So if you feel like traveling to Tokyo, there's an Airbnb for this. Maybe we'll share the link if we can send that out as part of our wrap up here. And I'd encourage everyone to give it a try. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm glad we have such an exciting group of people on the webinar here today. So I want to start to wrap up by making one or two more comments. We've talked about how physical exercise affects brain function, but can brain exercise also affect physical function? And of course, the answer is yes, because the brain and the body is sort of a two-way street. And I want to first talk about how making the visual system faster and more accurate with BrainHQ training can improve balance. This is a great example I'm going to share from researchers at the University of Illinois who study balance and fall risk. It turns out that when you trip and start to fall, your brain gets a lot of information that this is happening. Balance sensors in your inner ear go off, and posture sensors from your musculature go off. But your visual system plays an important role as well. As your head tips forward and the world speeds up around you, kind of like this picture, having a fast, accurate visual system can help you detect that you're starting to fall and perhaps react fast enough to prevent that fall before it starts. And this was shown just beautifully in a research study. These researchers enrolled 45 adults with a history of falls. Half of them did BrainHQ training with the visual intensive focus, and half were in a control group. Now, before and after training, they were assessed with a set of 14 different real-world tasks involving standing, sitting, and walking, which all related to balance and fall risk. And you can see the results here. In blue is the control group, and they don't really change very much over the course of the study. But in green is the BrainHQ training group, and you see that they get quite a bit better on this measure of fall risk. And in fact, because it's a standardized test, people scoring below this red line have a high risk. And so brain training helped these people improve their physical performance really quite significantly. And as another pretty cool example, here at Posit Science, we see this with our sports partners as well. BrainHQ is increasingly used by top athletes to improve their physical performance. For example, if you think about baseball, the hitters just got less than a second to read that baseball before they tried to swing and how to hit it. And as a result of that, having a faster, more accurate brain could help hitters. And just so you know, it's fun. BrainHQ assessments and training are now being used by Major League Baseball in what they call the player development program, which is like a summer camp that prospects go to train for the major leagues. And of course, in football, if you're a quarterback, which I'm sure a few of you must be, right? You have under 3 seconds after you get handed the ball to remember the play, read the field, find the receivers and throw before you're going to get tackled by a 300-pound defensive lineman. So having a fast, accurate brain is crucial for game-winning performance. And that's why Tom Brady, who used to be at the New England Patriots and now is the Tampa Bay Bucks, he's also the guy who won his 6th Super Bowl at the age of 43, talks about the importance of brain training with BrainHQ in his best-selling TB12 method book, where he shares all of his approaches for top brain health and body health. So once again, we see that just like physical training can improve brain performance, brain training can improve physical performance. So let's wrap up here. We've talked about how the basic science of exercise changes the brain, and we've talked about clinical trials showing that exercise improves cognitive function. And the big picture is that getting more physically active in all kinds of ways improve your brain health. And if you'd like some advice about things you can try, just open up the last email you got from BrainHQ. You should be getting a weekly update every week in your email on Sundays. Just search for BrainHQ and weekly update, and you'll see a link in there like this. Around energize your brain or another topic. And if you click go now, you'll be taken to the BrainHQ website where you'll find a ton of interesting resources around how to engage in physical activities like this and improve your brain health. So I'll stop my slides there.
While Henry is transitioning into this next portion of the webinar, we're actually going to launch our third poll of the day here. So you should be seeing the poll come up on screen. We want to know what your favorite exercises are. You should be able to make multiple selections here if there's more than one. So go ahead and give it a look. Do you have a favorite kind of exercise?
Over the course of the pandemic, I got a bike and I go biking in the morning pretty frequently. It's San Francisco, so it's very hilly. I definitely get my exercise. And I also like to go to the gym in the morning and lift weights, which is a habit I developed when my son was a teenager, and we used to go to the gym together, and we've kept up even though we're living in different cities now.
Oh, that's great.
But especially at the gym, it's nice to have a habit in the morning. It's nice to get up, and I see the same people every morning at 6 a.m. So it's kind of a social activity as well.
Yeah, I know the same feeling. I have a dog and I live in an apartment without a backyard. So we're taking him out for walks 3 or 4 times a day. And, we have our neighborhood, we have our neighbors with their own dogs too. So, we have our usuals that we like to see on the street when we're going out for walks.
I think a dog's a great excuse to get exercise.
It
so
is. It
well
really
done.
is.
Well done.
All right. It looks like everybody has answered this one. So let's go ahead and end the poll there and share the results. And it looks like a lot of you, like me, enjoy walking.
There's a surprising number of weightlifters on here, and not too many team sports players. That's kind of interesting, but a lot of yoga and Pilates. That's getting more and more popular, and the health effects of that are becoming more and more clear.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the poll, and then we're going to move on to the next portion of the webinar where Dr. Mahncke is going to have a chat with Dr. Voss.
Fantastic. Dr. Voss, do we still have you on the line? Hey, there you are. Hey, how are you doing?
Hello. Welcome.
Thanks for joining us. Well, just to introduce you to our audience today, Dr. Michelle Voss got her PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She's now an associate professor and the Dean's Scholar in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at the University of Iowa. And she was awarded the Early Career Scholar of the Year Award, which sounds like a pretty fantastic thing. She's a world expert in the field of physical activity and brain health, and she's published more than 100 scientific articles. So Dr. Voss, we're really honored and delighted to have you join us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start off with just a tiny bit about you. Tell me a little bit about how you originally came to this field. What got you interested in exercise and brain health?
Yeah. So I can resonate a lot with some where you ended up in the sports example. So I grew up being really active, played a lot of sports as a kid, and one of the sports I played most competitively was tennis.
Oh,
And they say I saw about 7% say that they play tennis on the whole. And they say tennis is a mental game, right? 90% of tennis is having your head in the game, and there's the idea of mental toughness. And so over and over, I kept encountering that concept that, this idea of playing sports and having high performance mentally really had a big physical component. Much of getting more mentally tough was physical training so that you were prepared in any circumstance. So that really stuck with me. And I played tennis at University of Illinois, where a lot of the science happened to be happening about how physical activity affected the brain and mental performance in all realms and the highest levels of performance and throughout the lifespan. And so I was hooked once I found that was something that I could do for a career.
So I'm somehow now imagining researchers at University of Illinois going out and finding the top seeded tennis champs at University of Illinois and pulling them out of tennis and into a career in brain science. Do I have that right?
It's funny you say that. I did actually meet my honors advisor on the tennis court.
Well, I won't ask if you won or you lost, but you must have given them a good game for them to pull you into research this way. And I saw from your bio that you're also a cyclist. It looks like you volunteer at the Iowa Bike Library. So has that been a part of your scientific? I mean, how would you say that your athletics has helped you as a scientist? Do you feel like that's that mental toughness comes into your work as a researcher?
Yeah, I definitely feel so. I like endurance sports, and as I've gotten out of tennis and more into life after college, I've taken to endurance sports. And first started as running and tried my hand at different half marathons and marathons.
Oh wow!
And then over time, wanted to look for more diversity of activities, and actually through COVID, really rediscovered a love of cycling, and the Iowa City community and Iowa in general is a great cycling community here. So.
Fantastic. Nice and flat, maybe really compared to San Francisco. So.
Well, that's a myth. That's a myth there. In Iowa City, we have lots of hills, and there's a big movement to explore off roads, and there's a lot of a huge trail system here, and so it's quite a great place to cycle.
And so, as you look back on the field of physical exercise and brain health, when was it that people first started to understand what we talked about today, that something you do with your body, physical exercise, could change, your brain? Seems like that must have been an insight or a breakthrough at some point in scientific history.
Yeah. I think around the 1990s was a breakthrough decade, I would say, for thinking about the basic biology of how physical movement would affect the brain in ways that would protect our memory as we get older. So it was in the 1990s that there was the first studies that showed that wheel running, even for just a week in mice and rats, and wheel running in animals would increase BDNF, the molecule in the brain that is so important for learning and memory, and that declines with aging. And that can happen in just a week. And if you did it for 2 weeks, you'd have a bigger improvement. And the fact that was happening in a structure that wasn't traditionally associated with movement, but was more associated with memory, was sort of an insight of, could we leverage then physical movement, which is accessible and doesn't come with as many side effects as we know, and comes with a lot of enjoyment in many cases, to improve memory. And after that came discoveries that wheel running and running would increase the rate of the birth of new cells in that same area of the brain. And then we started to see more studies with human adults, seeing that those studies would translate, or those findings could translate to humans, to see that cognition could improve in randomized controlled trials, that areas in the brain like the hippocampus can grow even with 3 times a week, and reverse the atrophy with aging. That started to happen when brain imaging started to become more prevalent in the 2000s.
Yes.
So I would say now we're at the stage that you presented, where we have the meta-analyses, we have the synthesis across studies, where we can start to see what are the patterns and where are we seeing similarities.
Well, it is an incredible journey, like you say, over just those 20 or 25 years. It must have been a shock to have those mice running and not see a change in the motor parts of the brain where you'd expect, but in the memory parts. And now we're at a point, like you say, where we can look at 36 studies and learn something. So are we done? Is there anything left to be learned about physical exercise and brain health? Are you wrapping it up and going to pick up that tennis racket again? Or what do you see as the next big things we need to figure out for this field?
Yeah, there's
So
a
what are
lot
you
we need
working
to
on to
learn.
figure
So
that
there's a
out?
lot we've learned. We've learned, I think the effects are there, right? The effects, there are benefits. So I think the question's no longer is, does exercise benefit cognition at any
Mhm.
stage in the lifespan? We know that that is yes, and that is through the biological effects on the brain. What's next is understanding more about how to tailor the benefits to every different lifestyle and the things that people enjoy. So we know that people will stick with exercise the more they enjoy the activities that they're doing.
Right.
So for us to be able to give the basic core nuggets of insights of, well, what are the main principles to stick to? Like, that you want to get your intensity up enough that you're breathing slightly hard, and that we know intensity matters. But other than that, pick what you like.
Pick
Things
what
like
you
that
like.
are the things
Yep.
we need to know, and whether that intensity level matters for different people. And some people need more than others. We need to understand more about that.
And it seems like one of the other things we should be trying to figure out is, how can we make exercise just more accessible to people? Sometimes maybe we live in an environment where, people can't go out quite as much for some reason or the other. And I wonder, in all the work you've done, and I'm sure the travel you've done for your work, what you're sort of seeing around societies and like decisions we can make as a society to make exercise more available to people.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we can do as a society to help sort of accomplish the goals of mitigating the effects of aging on memory by things like physical activity is looking for creative ways to get that physical activity. And you notice I'm using that term physical activity, which we can compare to exercise. So as an example, there's lots of ways that we can be active, and part of that is transportation. We can commute to work. We can decide to take the stairs, even though it might be a little more uncomfortable than taking the elevator. We can find little ways that we can also then modify our environments to have more sidewalks, and we can seek out those hills when we're taking our bike rides. So little things, I think, in our environment that can inspire us to have spontaneous activity that gets us to be more active sort of regularly throughout the day could help us also sort of see new ways to get the types of activity that have been beneficial for our cognition. And the gym can be part of that. But I think it's really important for us to start to see other ways to get that activity in.
Well, yeah, let me ask a little bit more about that, because I think a lot of times with exercise, people get the feeling, oh, this is a big heavyweight thing. I need to train to run 5 miles. I've got to buy a gym membership. But I think what I hear you saying is, hey, maybe there's a lot of physical activity that we can engage in that's not quite as, overwhelming and intense, that could be good for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think it's intriguing that the meta-analysis that you highlighted found that 45 minutes gave a really great benefit. Yep. What is intriguing as well is that the physical activity guidelines that have come out from the United States and around the world have progressively reduced the amount of activity, the length of that activity that you need. So per session. So for example, the recommendation is still to try to get 150 minutes a week where your heart rate is getting up. It used to be that they said, get that in 30-minute increments. Okay. And then it was get it in 10-minute increments. Okay. Now it's, hey, every minute counts. And I think what we're learning about the biology of how exercise affects the brain, it translates to that kind of mechanism or the mechanics of how it works, that every bit counts, ups and downs. Those are beneficial. Your body is increasing its regulatory capacities. Hey, if you can go longer, of course, that's great. But don't be afraid to go shorter if it means whether you're getting something or not. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great news, because of course, these are things in terms of broadly physical activity that all of us might be able to do a little bit more, even if we don't want to join a gym or get on the bike for 40 minutes. So that's fantastic. Well, with that, Michelle, I'm noticing we have quite a few questions coming in, and I wonder if we might turn to Margie and start to hear what people on the webinar would like to learn more about. Margie, what are you seeing?
Sure. I think this was kind of partially addressed just now, but a lot of people are asking, based on that 45-minute thing, can you break it up into 20-minute sessions? Does it have to be 45 minutes at a time? And I think you addressed that, but maybe just a few more words on that.
No, and I'll make it clear, Michelle's the expert here. So where what she says is what we should go with. So what do you say, Michelle?
Yeah, I think it's definitely okay to break it up. In fact, we just had a study recently where we had participants take 9-minute breaks, and every 9 minutes did 1 minute. And so they got 4 minutes in a 50-minute period. And we compared the effects on a type of memory called working memory, which is keeping multiple things, kind of mental juggling, let's say. And the benefits were just as large when they had that interspersed exercise compared to the full duration of the 50 minutes. And there's other examples like that where you can have interspersed exercise. And so we're learning more and more about how that works, but it's indeed promising to see that it's okay to take that rest.
Okay, to take that rest, take that breather. You don't have to wear yourself out. And, you know, if you were headed out to lunch, maybe, you know, taking the stairs just for a few minutes is going to add up over, you know, months of your life and give something better. That's good to hear.
That is great. I'm happy to hear that. A couple of people have asked a bunch of related questions is there any information or any studies on having kind of quicker reflexes and lower incidence of dementia, better cognitive health? So things like, you know, ping pong players or tennis players or juggling, are those things particularly good? Do we know anything about that?
There's something super interesting, Michelle, about this kind of exercise where it's not about building aerobic capacity or strength per se, but it does seem like it's about making your brain and your body work together faster and more accurately. Have studies been done in this area, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, studies are starting to be done in this area to try to understand what you can gain above and beyond from physical activity when you have that cognitive challenge engaged. And some of the inspiration in terms of biology of how this works is that we know that exercise can increase the rate of new brain cells in the area important for memory. And if you add cognitive challenge after that exercise period, it helps integrate those new cells into the brain, because the brain has to use them to do things, let's say sports, for example. And in the animal studies, you'll see things like the building you showed, Henry, that the animals get to traverse and explore, and it's like a playground. So you can imagine what this looks like for an adult, which is sport and having interaction that's spontaneous and having to react to it and being challenged. So I think there's good evidence for why we would see a benefit of combining physical activity and sport, especially when it's cognitively challenging. And we're just still starting to figure out how to study that scientifically to see what we can learn. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic, and that's cool.
Yeah.
What else are we seeing?
A couple of people have asked, you know, they say they try to walk as fast as they can in nature. Is there actually a benefit to slowing down and paying more attention to the trees? Or is the goal still kind of to keep your heart rate up as high as you can have it?
You know, this is a great question for me as well. My wife likes to go out for a walk in the morning, and when I walk with her, she's now a very fast walker, like much faster than me. So what do you think? Am I on solid ground if I tell her to slow down and smell the roses a little bit, Michelle?
It reminds me of the previous question, which can you stop and take a break? And then the last question, where can you add in that cognitive challenge? I think it's actually a really neat idea to slow down and exercise the mental muscle, so to speak, of awareness and focus, and looking at what you see in nature and trying to filter out distractions in that way. And then have periods where you maybe then go up the hill, right, and work hard physically, and then let your mind take a break, and then have some focus periods. So sort of keep variety.
Yeah. That makes sense. And, you know, because this exercise is already releasing some growth factors in your brain, it's probably a good time for your brain to be rewiring itself with some, you know, whether it's smelling the roses or doing something else cognitively stimulating as you go. So, okay, well, I'll pass that on to my wife. We'll see if she listens.
A couple of people have asked about what do you recommend for indoor exercise if you live somewhere where it's way too snowy, or if, you know, there's another reason that you are kind of bound indoors and you can't go out walking in nature. How do you keep it kind of cognitively stimulating and good?
Yeah, anything you enjoy is always the first step. Find things you can enjoy, and there are some gyms that are having some of those interactive games available on the cardio equipment. If you find those can be fun, where you're navigating through a world and playing a game, you know, and that's sort of naturally enticing. Or bring a buddy and come with a friend to help make it rewarding and fun. You're always going to work a little harder when you have a friend. and so you can think about different ways to incentivize that indoor activity if it otherwise feels pretty pretty boring.
And I've seen more and more things like on YouTube or Facebook Live where people are kind of leading indoor, not exactly aerobics, but various kinds of things you can do indoors. Have you seen some of those? Do you think that's a good idea for people who are stuck inside in the winter?
Yeah, I think maximizing also that social accountability and those social benefits of connections that you make when you're being active, that's huge. There have been studies that show that when you're active with other people and when you're in a social environment, that sort of decreases some of the other stresses that come with physical activity. So the more that you can find other ways to sort of de-stress, and those social connections and support is one thing, the more you're sort of freeing up the other resources to maximally respond to exercise. Yeah.
And then I have to ask you, I'm in San Francisco, we don't have winter, but in Iowa, you have a winter. So do you still get out on that bike in the winter, or are you stuck inside a little bit more yourself?
Yeah, we've been creative on getting out on the bikes. There's the fat bikes where we have 4-inch wheels. And so we can get out in the snow and in any weather. And then there's different creative
That's very
ways.
impressive.
Yeah. And when we're used to the snow, we're good at clearing sidewalks and good at making it possible to get out. And of course, shoveling is its own workout.
There we go.
And that's one of those, anything you can do to be active, it all counts.
It all counts. It all counts. Well, that's great.
So a lot of people are wondering, and this is kind of related, I think, what about listening to something while you're exercising? Music, a podcast, an audiobook? Is that okay to do?
Yeah, I think it's anything that increases that enjoyment, and if it's something that's helping you think about, imagine future events and plan in the future, that's another example of ways that you're using your brain while you're exercising that could actually benefit the brain in multiple ways, because we know that actually the areas of the brain that are involved with future planning are the same areas involved with recalling past events. So that's an example right there of a type of cognitive activity that you are doing, and the exercise is boosting the ability for it to be improved. But anything you can do that is rewarding and while you're exercising, that will get you out the door more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that if you have that to look forward to, you're going to listen to some music you really like. If that helps you exercise an extra day in the week, then that's probably going to be helpful for your brain and your body.
One person here asked an interesting question. So just say you're over 75 and you have joint issues and you're not able to exercise as much as you used to. Does the earlier in life exercise help you out over the long term, or do you need to keep exercising?
That's a great question. And more we're trying to understand the long-term protective benefits from being active in the midlife period or middle age periods. And all the evidence so far does suggest that there definitely are protective benefits over the long term. It's harder to track the same people over time, but when that has been done in those long-term epidemiological studies, the benefits do seem to be there. When you start to have mobility challenges, I think that's the time that you try to find other ways to be active, perhaps cognitively engaging and keeping your mind active in other ways.
I mean, that seems consistent with what a lot of researchers are thinking about dementia risk reduction right now. There's this notion of brain resilience, right? The things that we do very early in our life or middle age, we can kind of put it in the bank so that as we get older, our brains are more resilient. And it sounds like, is this right, that people are thinking that even middle-aged exercise can help build a more resilient brain so that when you are in your 70s and 80s, 90s, you're more likely to resist dementia? Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So 2 ways people are thinking about that is that when you sort of build up your reserves in middle age, so we saw the graph where the hippocampus started to shrink as you go 1 year as you get older. But imagine you can increase the height from which it's shrinking by being active in the middle ages.
Right.
So if you can give yourself some buffer in the middle age period, then you have more resources to work with as you get older. The other way people think about it is there's other areas of the brain besides the hippocampus that exercise has been shown to benefit, like the prefrontal cortices. And these areas could help make up for some of the declines in areas of the hippocampus. And this is another way that you have this reserve. You have other areas of the brain that can start to make up for some of the areas that are directly affected by pathologies affecting memory.
That makes sense. But let me ask a follow-up. Is the opposite true, which is to say, let's say I led a dissolute life as a middle ager, right? I didn't exercise much, drank a lot and so forth and so on. Is it too late for me then when in my 60s, my 70s? Should I not even bother starting to exercise because, it's too late? Or would you say, is it ever too late to start getting some exercise to help your brain?
Yeah, I would say it's never too late. And in fact, the studies and the meta-analysis from that you presented, the majority of those include criteria that people have been inactive for a long period of time before they enroll in the studies. So most of what we know about cognitive benefits for memory, for example, as you take up physical activity when you're 60 plus or 50 plus, that is when people have taken up activity in their later years. Yeah.
Okay, so it's never too late. If you're doing it good, you're putting money in the bank, and if you're not, it's always a good time to start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is a good news story. Margaret, do we have time for one or two more questions?
I think so. I'm going to ask this one. I'm not sure if it's totally answerable, but a lot of people have asked it, so we'll see what you say. And that is, what heart rate should they be targeting for kind of maximum improvement in cognitive function? Is it different for every person?
Yeah, and that's one of those markers we can have on our our wristwatches nowadays when we're exercising, and so we have great insight into what our heart rate is, and it is different for everyone. It's going to depend a lot on your resting heart rate, how hard your heart is working when you're getting up in the morning, not doing any exertion. That's sort of your starting point, and then you want to move up from there to become to have more intensity. And I think the indicators that Henry talked about in terms of can you sing, can you talk, those are good indicators to be thinking of. You want to get into a zone where we usually think of, let's say like 50% above your resting heart rate. So that, which is getting into that zone where you can talk, but you can't sing. And you could keep it up for about 30 minutes, but probably start to get tired at about 45. So you can use a number of indicators to start to see for yourself, what does that feel like to you?
So if you can measure your heart rate, great, but you can also just sort of use this kind of behavioral indication. Hey, how hard is my breathing, so to speak?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And when you have the options on your watch, just to take into account resting heart rate and to have those sort of tailored zones for yourself, do take that opportunity because it is variable for everybody, and having the more tailored information does help. Yeah.
Super.
Great. Should I ask one quick
one more question, or you want to wrap it up? I'll leave it to you, Margie. Maybe one more question.
Just a quick one, because a few people have asked this also, although it probably doesn't apply to everyone, which is there a point where you're just exercising too much and it's actually, there's no more positive return, or it's actually negative?
Yeah, and in fact, in a lot of the studies, one thing that we've seen is that although the benefits are there at the group level, so for everyone overall, there's small to moderate benefits. When you look at plots that show individuals and show amount of change in, let's say, fitness and amount of change in a brain variable or cognition, there are always some people that decline. And we don't know if that's because we just pushed an individual farther than their personal limits would have been, or if their decline would have been worse before. But I think that is something that when you personally start to feel like exercise is bringing you more fatigue cognitively, than without the exercise, pay attention to that. And you always remember that you're an individual, and then, find what's working for you. We know that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was echoing it because I thought that was so right on target. Find what's working for you.
Yeah.
You should feel energized. I mean, maybe not right after you exercise, but later on in the day, and certainly the next day, you should feel like, that exercise was a source of energy and positive influence in your life, right? If you're getting to the point where you are, tired all day long, or the next day, you may be overdoing it, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. That during the exercise is, it's normal to feel fatigue during the exercise, but if after exercise, and especially the next day, you're just not feeling better, pay attention to that if that continues over, a week or two. Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Well, with
All right.
that, we should wrap up. And Michelle, I just want to say once again, thank you for joining us. It was super fun to talk with someone who knows so much about this like you. I really appreciate you carving some time out of your busy day to join us. And thanks to everyone who joined the webinar today. I know that every one of you is busy as well, got a lot of things going on, but hopefully this was an interesting and educational part of your day. And I hope you take it as a message to get out this afternoon if you're on the West Coast, or tomorrow if you're on the East Coast, and do some exercise like we've talked about and work on building your brain health. So thanks so much. Margie, anything else to wrap us up with?
Just a few more things. Thanks everyone again for participating. And if we didn't get to your question, you can try emailing it to support@brainhq.com. We'll get to as many as we can. We might not get to all of them. And check your email next week for some follow-up materials. We'll send out, the results of the polls, maybe some other helpful links, and so on. And that's it.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.